So good evening, everyone. Good seeing you all here this evening. So last week, I think it was probably Tuesday, or maybe it was Wednesday. I think it was Tuesday. Was it Wednesday? Brandon wrote me a text, and he says, "Hey," he goes, "What's your sermon for Sunday evening?" I have song services, and I said, "Man, I ain't even thought about what I'm going to preach about Sunday evening. In fact, I can't even come up with what I'm speaking on Sunday morning." And I was telling him, I said, it's weird. I said, I seldom have these problems, but last week, as I was preparing and looking at various kinds of lessons, I just hit kind of a mental drought, a blah, where I just couldn't seem to, come up with something that was meaningful to me or something that I thought would be meaningful to you. And so I hit one of those kind of drought things. And generally, I try to preach sermon series, and that way I kind of always know what I'm going to be doing next down the road, 6 weeks or even 8 weeks down the road. But I hadn't done that. I've got a series in my head, but I haven't decided just how I'm going about doing it. And so I kind of hit kind of a blah moment. So have you guys ever went through blahs? Just kind of maybe kind of like a gray area in your life. Now, the sermon probably would have fit much better 2 weeks back when we were in the middle of that conversion in the middle of that inversion, and it was just gray outside, and it was cold, and it wasn't getting warm, and there was no sun, and of course, now that I decided to do a sermon on the blahs, it's all sunshiny out and nice, all nice out. But blahs are something that's really real, and blahs usually come when you fall under the spell of monotony. Things are you just go through routines, and nothing seems to be really getting going. A good example of that would be as you get into November and into December, you're going through the holiday season, and everybody's really excited about that, and families getting together, and there's schedules, and there's a lot of busyness, but it seems to be kind of a good kind of busyness, and you're looking forward to getting together for parties and getting together with families and friends and having meals together and exchanging gifts. And then the new year comes, and the new year, we try to always look at it in terms of something that is positive, and so it portends something that's really good that's going to be there. And then all that stuff comes to an end, and January begins. And in Idaho, January and February can tend to be, the cold months. It gets cold out, and the days are really short. They're not really long. So it gets, you get up in the morning to go to work, and it's dark, and you come home from work and it's dark. And so the days are really short, and it's too cold to go out and want to hang out. And my doctor says, "You need to go walk, Richard. You need to be walking." And I'm thinking, I don't want to go walk in the cold, And so it's really easy to kind of get into the blahs. Or maybe you are a child or a teenager, and you're in the middle of the summer months, and it's school vacation, and so you've had time off from school, and the kids are coming up to mom and saying, "I'm so bored. There's nothing to do. What can we do? What's something that we can do?" And so it's because there's this monotony of not having something to do, and you can find yourself getting into the blahs because of that. And so I decided to maybe thinking about what are some ways that we can overcome the blahs. And it's not that I have anything super profound to share with you. The last part, though, might mean something to you. So if you'll open your Bibles to Psalm 90. Psalm 90. Psalm 90 is an interesting psalm itself. It's not a super lengthy psalm. It's 17 verses, but it's a great psalm. If you look at the heading on my Bible, it says God's eternity and man's transitoriness. And then it says the superscription is a prayer of Moses, the man of God. I'll say a little bit more about that later, but let's listen to the psalm, and then what we're going to do is I'm going to take us back to it, and I'll kind of give you an overview of the psalm and breakdown of its outline, and then we'll kind of go down through the psalm itself. Because as you read down through it, you'll see that it's got what I would call a God-man-God structure to it. So it begins by talking about God, verses 1 and 2. Then it talks about man from 3 to about 12, and then from 13 to 17 it talks about God. So it makes a full circle. There's God who has always been, and then there's man who's got some problems and different kinds of things, and then there's God who's everything. So listen to what it says. "Lord, you have been our dwelling place in all generations. Before the mountains were born, or you gave birth to the earth and the world, even from everlasting to everlasting, you are God. You turn man back into dust and say, return, O children of men, for 1,000 years in your sight are like yesterday when it passes by. Or as a watch in the night, you have swept them away like a flood, and they fall asleep. In the morning they are like grass which sprouts anew. In the morning it flourishes and sprouts anew. Towards evening it fades and withers away. For we have been consumed by your anger, and by your wrath we have been dismayed. You have placed our iniquities before you, our secret sins in the light of your presence. For all our days have declined in your fury. We have finished our years like a sigh. As for the days of our life, they contain 70 years, or if due to strength, 80 years. Yet their pride is but labor and sorrow, and soon it is gone, and we fly away. Who understands the power of your anger and your fury according to the fear that is due you? So teach us to number our days, that we may present to you a heart of wisdom. Do return, O Lord. How long will it be? And be sorry for your servants. O satisfy us in the morning with your loving kindness, that we may sing for joy the glad of our day, all our days. Make us glad according to the days you have afflicted us, and the years we have seen evil. Let your work appear to your servants, and your majesty to your children. Let the favor of the Lord our God be upon us, and confirm for us the work of our hands. Yes, confirm the work of our hands. Before we break it down, let me just, like I said, give you kind of a survey of the psalm itself. You notice that the superscription on it, it says that it's the prayer of Moses, the man of God. Now, this is the only psalm in the Psalter that is applied to God or is appointed that Moses is the one that wrote the psalm, the only one. All the others are by others, the sons of Korath or David, but here, this is the only one. So Moses, was this great man, but Moses, with all the great things and all the great leadership that he provided, there is also in the life of Moses a person who experienced great periods of what we might call monotony, maybe even to that of bringing forth the blahs. And so for 80 years, Moses, or for 40 years, Moses, at the age of 80, he tends sheep. You remember that he'd killed the Egyptian taskmaster, and then he runs from that, and he runs to the desert of Meridian, and there he's there. And I think I said to you probably several weeks back that when Moses came to the mountain of God, or Horeb, that was not an unfamiliar place to him, because that's where he shepherded his sheep. So he's out in a desert. And so for 40 years, that's who his company is. Now, he's got a wife and he has some children, but his company almost every day is that of shepherding sheep. Raised in the house of Pharaoh, and now 40 years, day in and day out, he shepherds sheep. He doesn't take weekends off. He doesn't take 2-week vacation. Sheep, you can't do that with them because they depend upon the shepherd to be with them every day. So there's this monotony that is there that goes on for 40 days. The same old bah, bah is what's going on. So his bahs turn into blahs. And then he spends like 40 years wandering in a circle year after year, the same terrain with the same wayward sheep. Only it's not, the little woolies. Now we're talking about the children of Israel, this headstrong flock of God that seem to vacillate between whether they're going to be obedient to God or whether they're going to go in their own direction. A lot like what Isaiah said, all we like sheep have gone astray, and each of us have turned to his own way. Well, that really is a description of the children of Israel, and in some cases it's a very good description of who we are as well. And so he is wandering around in circles year after year for 40 years, same terrain, same food, same manna, same quail. He's not getting lasagna. He's not getting spaghetti. He's not eating steak. It's the same old food over and over again, and the same old stubborn people. And so there is a monotony that tends to be set in here in this psalm that at least I think I could see it there. The psalm itself takes on almost a form of a prayer, if you will. You might notice how Moses addresses God directly. Verse 1, verse 2, verse 3, verse 5, verse 8, verse 13. This psalm is directed toward God as he speaks about who God is and what God is about. And so the psalm, it begins on this kind of a high note, that God is everlasting, that from the very beginning, after all creation, God, you are. And then he turns and he starts talking about man, and when he starts talking about man, it's not the best description of humanity that we'd like to see. He talks about the brevity of life. He talks about how things vastly pass away. He talks about how sin is ever before us and how he's having to deal with that. But then there is this crescendo that almost moves into being optimistic as he prays that God would be with him and that God would give us a new song, a song of joy to sing. And so there's something great about that thought itself. The outline of the psalm is the psalm begins with a strong emphasis on God, verses 1 and 2. And then it emphasizes changes from God to man from verses 3, I think, through verse 12. And then the final verses is, Lord, you are God. And you have always been. So, Lord, our God. So, here he is reminded that God's favor is something that is confirming to life, and that it's the answer to the doldrums or to the monotony that usually brings about the blahs that are in our lives. In other words, what it's saying is that we think about God and then we stop and we back up and then we look at our own lives. And we look at the brevity of our lives, and we look at the sin that is in our lives. And looking at those kinds of things, it can almost get depressing to our minds. But then we turn back to God, who is able to help us. And in doing so, it helps us do what I think it does, and that is that I think it helps us to break the spell of monotony or the blahs. And so when I'm talking about monotony or blahs, I'm not talking about those blue days you have. I'm talking about the blahs of the Christian life, or the follower of God. And so frequently our boredom or our blahs begin when we fall under the spell of monotony. It's where we almost get like vertigo, where we don't know which way to stand or which way to go with our lives. And the result of that is that it can lull us into this stupor where we are not going to live lives where we soar like eagles. We find ourselves more like chickens, scrambling around instead of who we should be as followers of God. So to avoid this, we need probably to get a new reference point or a more fixed point that we see something out in the future that is grand for us, that keeps us in the game or keeps us moving forward in a positive direction. So it begins with a reference point that we have. Now, Moses, you might notice how he establishes the right reference point. Look at verse 1. It says, Lord, you have been our dwelling place in all generations. In other words, what he's saying, that you have been our focal point throughout all the generations. Even when we have wavered and when we have gone astray, you've been the focal point that we always go back to. Now, if you read some of the classical literature, like, Plato or Sutton or any of those guys there, they oftentimes wrestled with this dilemma of what is the meaning of the universe. And here's what they concluded. A finite point has no meaning unless it has an infinite reference point. Listen to that again. A finite point has no meaning unless it has an infinite reference point. And for Moses, the infinite reference point is God. That's the infinite reference point, is God. And that's our reference point as well. But it's not just that, but we have another reference point over in Hebrews, the 12th chapter and verse 2, where the writer of Hebrews says, let us fix our eyes on Jesus, who's the author of our faith, and the fact that he is sitting at the right hand of the throne of God. So we have a reference point or a fixed point that we are to be aiming at beyond just what's going on in this life. And that's what Moses is saying. There's a fixed point for us. Yes, life can get, we can get into the doldrums here. We can get in the monotony of life. We can look at these things here, but we have this reference point where we're constantly moving toward God. Number 2 is the right perspective. Not only is the Lord, the God who is there, he's also the one who is eternal. He is from everlasting to everlasting. Look at verse 2. Before the mountains were born, or thou didst give birth to the earth and the world, even from everlasting to everlasting, thou art God. And so eternity is the substance of a shadow. Here's what we're doing here. We're living this brief period of life right here and now, but we are looking towards eternity. And that's what Moses is saying. Before everything happened, before anything came into being, from everlasting to everlasting, you are God. God has always been God. He is the reference point. He is the fixed point. He is the one solid point, the unmovable point that we can always look to and focus on, even when we feel as though we're losing our direction and what's going on with our lives. I love the way he looks at his life here. Before the mountains were born, before you gave birth to the earth and the world, from beginning to end, you are God. And then what Moses does, he begins to dissect the soul, or probe into our soul, and he's going to talk about who we really are. And he begins by, he looks at three different areas, and the first one is that he begins to look how short life is, the shortness of life, the brevity of life. And he begins to lament life's brevity with this allusion to the curse that began in the garden when the first man and woman, when they failed. But even before that, when God brought them from the dust of the earth and took the dust of the earth and formed from it a man and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and he became a living being. That's what he's looking back there in Genesis, the 3rd chapter, in verse 19. Now look at verses 3 and 6. You turn your people back to dust, saying, return to the dust, you mortals. And that's what happens to all of us. If we live and if we die and if we lie in our graves long enough, or as O.J. Russell said, our earth and trundle tent, if we're there long enough, then that's what happens, because we're like 98% water, and you take the water away from us and we turn to dust, or we turn to ash. I mean, that's just what it's about. So he says, return to dust, you mortals, for you 1,000 years are as passing a passing day, as brief as a few night hours, or the watches in the night. You sweep people away like the dreams that disappear. They're like grass that springs up in the morning. In the morning it blooms and flourishes, but by evening it's dry and it's withered. And you can almost see the vivid word pictures that are there. He says our life is like the passing hours or the watch hours in the night. The watch hours in the night lasted, at one point in history, was like 4 hours, and then it changed to, there were 3 hours throughout the night for a total of 12 hours. And he says, in those hours, they pass quickly away. Okay, so all of us sleep, right? And we sleep at night, right? And when you sleep at night and you say you go to bed, most of you probably go to bed around, 11:30, 12 o'clock at night? Unless you're Butch and Patty, who go to bed like 7:30 at night, But anyway, actually, I don't think they go to bed that early. But they go to bed pretty early, okay? But they wake up really early, too. Aren't the Comans, don't you guys go to bed really late, early in the night, too, and wake up at like 3 in the morning? Cannot get my head. That's about when I'm thinking about going to bed, is around there. So I'm a late person, so I don't, but anyway, all I was going to say is that, how you go to sleep at night, and when you go to sleep at night and when you fall into that deep REM sleep, and then all of a sudden you wake up, you go to sleep. We'll say we go to sleep at 11 o'clock, and you go to sleep at 11 o'clock, and then you wake up at 6 o'clock, and those 7 hours, they go by like that, unless you're a person that wakes up every 4 hours. But those moments of sleep, even if you say that you're a person that sleeps 3 hours or 4 hours, and then you wake up and then you go back to sleep, that's the watch hours. They go by rapidly. Boom, it's like you went to sleep and now you are awake. Or the passing of a dream. Lori sometimes we'll get up in the morning and she says, I had this dream last night. And I'll say, well, what was it? And she'll say a little bit about it. She goes, did you dream last night? I said, I dream every night. Every morning when I wake up, I have dreams. What were they about? I have no idea. I can't remember what those dreams were. Sometimes I try to work them out by going back to sleep and fixing whatever the dream was. But But dreams, they pass quickly. You can't remember your dreams all that way. It's flooded with dreams and then they disappear. Or as he says, or it's like grass. The grass comes up in the morning and then by evening it's withered away. And so he's talking about the brevity of life, how quickly it goes by. So the image is that of that which is temporary compared to that which is eternity. James talked about the same thing over in James, the 4th chapter, in verse 14, where he says, our life is but a vapor or a mist that is here for a little while and then vanishes away. And so that's what Moses is saying here. Now, I want you to think about how old Moses is here. Moses here, if he's writing this here, let's say he's 40 years in Midian, or 20 years, 40 years, I guess maybe 40 years in Egypt, 40 years in Midian, 40 years in the desert. That's what? That's 120 years, right? And so 120 years. That seems to us, whoa, that's a long time. But he's saying, even if it is that, okay, even if it is the 120 years or 100 years, what he's saying is, even no matter how long you've lived, it's like boom, and you've went through it, and it's over. So it's very quick. It's very brief. God's eternal, though. Okay? And then he talks about sins being so obvious in verses 7 down through about verse 11. And there he says that our sin is always lurking around the corner. We're always aware of that sin that's in our lives. And so we're overwhelmed not only by the brevity of life, but also by the blatancy of our sin. Listen to what it says. We wither beneath your anger. We are overwhelmed by your fury. You spread out our sins before you, our secret sins, and you see them all. We live our lives beneath your wrath, ending our years with a groan. 70 years are given to us. Some even live to 80. But even the best years are filled with pain and trouble. Soon they disappear and we fly away. Who can comprehend the power of your anger? Your wrath is as awesome as the fear you deserve. And so he says, our sins are there. They're blatant. And he says, and this is the New Living Translation I'm reading from, okay? But he said, you take our sins and you lay them out before you. And not just our sins, but even our secret ones, the ones that we think we've hidden pretty well away from everyone in here. God sees them and he lays them out there. And he feels undone because of it. So what is Moses talking about? Well, is it a possibility that Moses is talking about when he killed that Egyptian taskmaster in Egypt? He sees the taskmaster that has beaten a Hebrew, and he kills him. And remember, he buries him in the sand, and he thinks no one's seen that until he gets called on it. And then he runs for his life to Midian. He remembers the fact that he murdered a man and then tried to cover that up. This is found in Exodus chapter 2, verses 11 and 12. And so after many regret-filled years of wandering, carrying this burden, not only of his own sins, but if you consider the sins of the people who are so wrongward in so many ways, these sheep that are constantly going astray, he's bearing those sins. Not only is he thinking about his own sins, but he's thinking about the sins of the people that he is trying to lead through the wilderness, and it becomes super heavy upon him. So he talks about the brevity of life. He talks about the overwhelming blatancy of sin in his life, and then he talks about the days being empty. The third feeling that accompanies the blahs is that feeling of our lives don't have meaning to them. It's like having a gravestone that has your name on there but no epitaph whatsoever. Richard Sutton, a good dad, a faithful Christian. It's just Richard Sutton, dash. So was there, okay, so I guess what I'm trying to, Nicole, so what I'm trying to say to you is when I die and you do my headstone, I don't want something that says Richard Sutton on there. Put something cool on there. Like, Dad was cool, or, I don't, but. So in this section here, Moses gives us some valuable advice if we want to live our lives So they're more than just a footnote. And so here's what he says in verse 12. He says, so teach us to number our days that we may present to you a heart of wisdom. Teach us to number our days. So, Jake, do you have any idea how many days you have numbered? Okay, or Dave, do you have, okay, so does there anyone know, says, okay, we know exactly the number of our days? And the answer is that is no. By reason of strength, you might make it to 70. A little bit more strength, you might make it to 80, but, or quirky, make it to 90. You'll probably do like 105 is what I'm thinking, the quirky will. But he says that teach us to number our days so that we might present to you a heart of wisdom. And I think what he's trying to say there is teach us to number our days so that we take our days and see them as a great blessing. That if you get up in the morning and you have that day, then that's a wonderful gift that God has given to you to use your day and to use your days wisely and not to waste them, but to use them really well. David, over in Psalm 39, he talks about almost this exact kind of thing in verses 4 through 6. Listen to me as I read it to you. Lord, make me to know my end and what is the extent of my days. Let me know how transient I am. Behold, you have made my days as hand's breadths, and my lifetime as nothing in thy sight. Surely every man at his best is a mere breath. Surely every man walks about as a phantom. Surely they make an uproar for nothing. He amasses riches and does not know who will gather them. And so he's talking about living a meaningful life that goes beyond the ordinary, goes beyond just the routine of life, that goes beyond just amassing wealth or getting a big name. He says, teach me to number my days so I know how that I might live those days in a great kind of way. So what helps us remove the blahs? Look at verse 13 of Psalm 90. Verse 13. Do not return, O Lord. How long will it be? And be sorry for your servants. O satisfy us in the morning with your loving kindness, that we may sing for joy and be glad all our days. That to me is just the coolest nugget that's in Psalm 90 after he's talked about all these things about the brevity of our life and the sin that's in our lives and the fact that life is, that we need to number our days. And then he says, teach us to remember that you're going to return, that you are sorry for your servants, and satisfy us in the morning with your loving kindness, that we may sing for joy and be glad all our days. It goes on and talks about those things, but I think what he's trying to say is that the fact is that God is on our side. Even the fact that we are only for a while, he knows we're eternal. Even though we know that we are sinful, we can always return back to him. And that he desires to have a relationship. And because he desires to have a relationship with us, we can have a song that's in our heart. And that song helps move us out of the blahs and knowing that we know where we're going and we know who we are going to. Verses 13 to 17. Do return, O Lord. How long will it be? And be sorry for your servants. O satisfy us in the morning with your loving kindness, that we may sing for joy and be glad all our days. Make us glad according to the days have afflicted us and the years we have seen evil. Let your work appear to your servants and your majesty to your children. And let the favor of the Lord our God be upon us, and do confirm us the work as the work of your hands. Yes, confirm the work of your hands. So what is the work of his hands? God created us what? After his image. In the image of God, he created us. He didn't do anything else like that. As incredible and complex and beautiful as the world in which we live is, there's nothing as beautiful to God as you, and nothing as precious to God as you. And that helps us sing the blahs away. If you have been singing the blues about life, then you can sing about, the joy of life as well. And you can do that even when it rains. Because God is with us. God cares about us. So try singing a song like Moses, a song of consecration that will help you wisely number your days according to the rhythm of eternity. Try taking it to heart. Give you an example. I'm talking about open your songbooks to hymn 569. We're going to sing the first three stanzas, okay? And as we sing those stanzas, I want you to think about what he is saying here. Take my life and let it be consecrated, Lord, to thee. 2, take my hands and let them move at the impulse of your love. 3, take my voice and let me sing always only for my King. So let's do number 1. Take my life and let it be consecrated, Lord, to thee. Take my moments and my days, let them flow in ceaseless praise. Take my hands and let them move at the impulse of thy love. Take my feet and let them be swift and beautiful for thee. Take my voice and let me sing only always for my King. Take my lips and let them be filled with messages from thee. So he's given us a new song, and that might be a good song that you could maybe pull out throughout the week and sing it and make it your song as well. Moses' prescription for getting out of the blahs is looking to God and allowing him to lead us through our days, whether it's our life or whether it's our hands or whether it's our voice or whether it's our material possessions or whatever it is, that we give them completely to God. And it begins, of course, this evening by us dedicating, giving our lives to God for the rest of the week. So the message is yours, the lesson is yours. Why together we stand and sing.